Thank you. I welcome the revenue here, particularly my Kilkenny fellow mate there. I always welcome a Kilkenny man to Dublin. Anyway, just going to start with VAT, and I want to explain what I'm talking about discrepancies in VAT and would they value-added tax as we know it. And I'm particularly asking this question because I was approached by an individual, which I can't name, I won't name the case, but he said that there was discrepancies in VAT and the way they are being applied in this country, in particular in co-ops. And I think he brought his case to Europe, and you might know his case back 3 or 4 years ago. And I think he won his case in the European Court of Justice and was referred back to the revenue, which nothing ever happened since. And basically, why I'm asking this question: are they an advantage to co-ops that are being VAT, and when an individual farmer, as if being a farmer co-op arrangement, are they advantaged by being in that co-op and refund? What I'm talking about is level playing field or equal treatment. That's what I'm talking about here. And this man seems to think that they weren't, and he was unfairly treated, and he lost his business, and he was trying to compete against people that had an advantage. I just want a general opinion. I'm not talking about the individual case, though, just generally on VAT I want to ask you about, and the way VAT has been applied, and are there discrepancies in the system?
Thanks very much, Deputy. I understand what you're talking about is the interaction of what's called the flat rate credit
flat rate VAT
for unregistered farmers and the pricing structure that's used within some of the cooperative frameworks for dealing with particular agricultural activity.
That's right.
There was representations made about whether there's an abuse of the flat rate system, and we conducted a study. The sector was the poultry sector.
Yes, right.
And we conducted a study of the pricing mechanism, and the EU VAT rules provide that you can have a flat rate scheme to compensate unregistered farmers for their VAT inputs. But one of the conditions laid down in the VAT directives is that the sector can't overcompensate. And so what we did is we did a study, and then the Minister for Finance brought in a provision in the Finance Act, I'd say it might be 2 years ago, to provide a mechanism to exclude a sector or a subsector of the unregistered farmers sector from the flat rate addition, subject to an analysis by revenue and the establishment of the fact that there was overcompensation. And so that provision was brought in. And
did that rectify? We say if there were a discrepancy,
there's another bit to go on the tail. So once the legislation was brought in, we did a detailed analysis of the sector to establish if there was overcompensation in the sector. And so we have sent our report to the Minister, the Minister for Finance, and it is now with the Minister. And he has to consider, I think, I'm not 100% certain of this, but I think it would have come up in the context of the finance bill, and he acknowledged that he had received the report from ourselves, and again his officials are considering it. So there will need to be a specific provision for the sector, and what that will mean is that unregistered farmers in the poultry, and the poultry industry is really, like, it's interesting in that day-old chicks are hired out nearly, and then the farmer feeds them and grows them, and then they go back to the company, and then they're killed and end up packaged as chicken. And so that is with the Minister to determine whether he'll bring forward a provision to remove the flat rate status from the poultry sector, which will mean that farmers in that sector will have to register for VAT, and then they'll be in the normal system.
Yeah. Well, and were they directed from the European Court of Justice on that case for the revenue for yourselves to take on? There was no recommendations or directives from...
No,
the case didn't direct you to do anything in particular?
No, but the issue is that and there has been a number of your colleagues have made representations and have met some of our officials and about the case and the issue, and the concern is, again, that it may well, the practices in the poultry sector, the concern is if they are brought into some of the other sectors. And now we have this provision which will allow us to do that study of other sectors. And the challenge is for us to know what's going on, because this is all to do with the pricing models, the price of food, the feedstuffs and all the rest of it. It's not really in the tax system. It's in the commercial contract relationships between the parties.
But there could be an advantage to people within that system. We say through feedstuffs and all that.
There is no doubt that within the poultry sector, the pricing structure allowed for an overcompensation of the VAT for some people who were in that trade.
Do we know, farmers in general, do you know how many farmers are registered for VAT and many are non-registered for VAT? Is that a thing you'd know offhand? You know, farming in general, besides poultry, in general?
I'd know it offhand if I had a little bit of time.
There's
about 110,000 farmers. So most of them are part-time at this stage. There's a very small number of farmers registered for VAT. It's probably less than 10,000. I spent a lot of time in my career in VAT, and I used to know these figures off the top of my head. But we publish a really interesting report on the farming sector and tax, and we updated it recently. And if you like, we'll send on the link to that report.
Okay, and another reason why I'm asking this at the moment, because of the present situation with beef and the feedlots, and that's why I'm coming to it. Okay, we're talking about poultry up to now, but the feedlots, which are mostly owned by factory owners and processors, and which have an advantage in that they're buying off of the farmer, eating these feedlots, they're able to upset the market by having all these cattle in reserve, and they can use to fix prices if they want to, because they have the cattle to do it, and can supply this at the behest of a farmer. Can supply their own beef, which has, of course, the farmer was involved in the beginning with and rearing and all that. So would this have an implication for that sector and this VAT? Would that be given an advantage to processors in particular? This VAT that we're talking about, if the same scale, if it's not changed, and that's the one I'm really wanting to get at. That this could be given beef processors an advantage against an ordinary farmer that's trying to fatten cattle, like I do myself, and try to supply from hoof to factory. And these would have an advantage through this VAT thing, and that's what I want to ask you. Are they an advantage there, and should be a loophole closed that they are?
There was a recent parliamentary question about the feedlots in the beef sector, and so far we haven't seen evidence. And the process is different in that a lot of the overcompensation on the poultry was because they were supplying the feedstuffs to the chicken rearer.
We're all tied in, yeah.
Whereas with the feedlot stuff, it's a different model. But what we have said, and what we've said in reply to the parliamentary question, and what are very open to, because ultimately we find out things that are happening after the event, because that's the way the tax system works. Tax returns follow the activity, the period for things to be returned. So often the earliest we will be aware of something could well be 2 years. It could be 2 years in place. And what we're always open to is information on practices in the sector. And so far, and what we said in the parliamentary question is that we have no evidence to date. But we're not. I hope that we're not stupid, that if we know that it's happening in a sector, that we will be keeping an eye on.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. Now that you're aware, we say that will you scrutinise that more so now that you're aware of this, and that there's no advantages being taken by processors in particular, or factory owners.
We are aware of the practices that took place in one sector, and we will be actively looking to see if it's taken place in other sectors. But we're also open to information.
Okay, that's done. Your report into the Minister, now I know you don't set policy, that's the Minister's problem. What way would you see if scrutinise it if the Minister had to come back with means and ways of fixing the problem? Would it be to force farmers to register for VAT? Would that
it would remove the flat rate compensation for the sector. So how
that would be a good thing here. I'm a farmer, so that would be a good thing here. I wouldn't be looking for that now.
I was going to explain how the flat rate system works, but then you probably know how it works as well as I do. But basically the flat rate system works by an addition of a percentage to the price paid by the registered purchaser. And I don't know, is it 5.8%?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So if an unregistered farmer sells his cattle, he gets an additional 5.8% on the price. And what that is meant to do, it's meant to compensate the farmer for the VAT on the inputs, whether it's on running the farm and the tractor and keeping the thing going.
And all that, yeah.
Well, yeah, feed and feedstuffs where it's not zero rated. And it's calculated based on macroeconomic data across the sector in its entirety, and that's why some farmers register, because if you're a tillage farmer, you probably have more inputs. So mostly the registered farmers are tillage farmers because they have higher VAT ability.
Fertiliser and all that.
Yeah. And
is feedstuff a zero VAT? Is feedstuff a zero VAT?
Zero rated. Most of it is zero rated. Livestock.
Yeah.
Feedstuff is zero rated for VAT.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Good anyway. I'm glad you gave me those few answers.